I think he doesn't control himself. Like the judge made that point. He reacts impulsively. He doesn't obey rules. He doesn't follow the normal standards of a courtroom or any other kind of proceeding like this. He always has to be the person with the last word. He always has to be the person defining the terms of the conversation. And so, yeah, he's not going to listen to a judge telling him to shut up because that's just not his nature. At the same time, it allows him to speak to the base, as you said, because the argument is not going to be necessarily just with those jurors in the courtroom. The argument is going to be the people who are going to vote on Tuesday in New Hampshire and every primary after that and in the general election in the fall. And we just try to convince them, don't pay attention to the fact that I have been found liable for sexual assault, which he has. Don't pay attention to the fact that I'm going to have to pay millions of dollars for defamation, which he will. Pay attention to the fact that I say this is a witch hunt. It's a con game. Those are the words, of course, he used. And therefore, dismiss the substance of these allegations and just attribute it to the deep state conspiracy against him.
Yes, his base is watching and they might love it. However, the rest of the world is watching as well. And the base just isn't enough votes to win. Joyce, I kept thinking today, what are other judges thinking, right? Donald Trump has several other trials on the horizon. And what must judges be thinking as they're watching him throw a tantrum in this courtroom? They've got to be thinking, what's going to be in this for me next?
I think that's right, Steph, because this case that we're seeing today is a short trial, right? This is 2, 3, 4 days, and then it's done. The incentive is for Judge Kaplan to get it across the finish line. There's no suggestion that Donald Trump would be better behaved if there was a mistrial here and a new trial. He just wants to bring it to a conclusion and let E. Jean Carroll get her verdict. But in the criminal cases, the judges are looking at longer trials, and the incentives are very different. And fortunately for those judges, there's a federal rule of criminal procedure, Rule 43, that authorizes them to remove a disruptive defendant from the courtroom. They'll take steps to protect his rights. They will warn Donald Trump before they do it. They will continue to advise him about proceedings in the courtroom, probably put him in a penalty box of sorts that lets him observe and hear the proceedings, but not let the jury hear or view him. So the courts are well equipped to handle this sort of proceeding, and Donald Trump has now tipped his hand and told the judges in the criminal cases what's likely in store for them.
Michael, let's talk about President Biden. How does his team feel post-Iowa? His campaign says they raised more than $1.6 million in the 24 hours since Trump's win, and that's after they had a huge haul in the last quarter of last year.
That's right, Steph. $97 million that they raised in the final 3 months of 2023, starting the year with $117 million in the bank. And they point out that that's more than the total amount of money that the Republicans spent on the airwaves in Iowa. And so regardless of who is the Republican nominee, the Biden campaign has a significant cash advantage to start the year. But the Biden campaign, of course, has maintained all along that they expect to be running against Donald Trump. That's been the plan, expectation all along. And we continue to see, as you mentioned, that $1.6 million, the ways in which Democrats are responding to that threat. Vice President Harris today was on ABC's The View. She said she's scared as heck, and that's why she's campaigning so hard. Well, a lot of Democrats are scared as heck about Donald Trump returning to the White House, and that's why they're giving so much money to Biden's campaign. Now, the flip side of that, Steph, is that because of, as Peter lays out, the risk of Donald Trump as the nominee and the risk of him returning to the White House, that makes Democrats especially sensitive to everything involving President Biden. His concerns about his age, concerns about the strategy in the campaign. And so his campaign has to continue to navigate that. But they have a strong theory of the case, they believe, a strong argument to make to voters. And we're going to continue to see the president toggling the campaign, as we've seen him already with some strong speeches about President Trump as a threat to democracy, with the day job of being president. Tomorrow, the president is going to take that Rose Garden strategy on the road, Air Force One to North Carolina, to talk about the economy as he will continue to lay out his economic argument to voters this year.
Peter, it looks like both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are itching for a rematch, but polls show that is the last thing most Americans want. Then how do you square those two?
Yeah. Well, that's why they're getting it, because you've got two determined men in their late 70s and early 80s who want to go at it again, right? And Donald Trump has made very clear that he feels that, or at least he's arguing anyway, he never lost the election. He can't believe he lost to Joe Biden. He feels, viscerally, offended at the idea he lost to Joe Biden. And you hear basically from Joe Biden almost the same thing he told reporters a few weeks ago. He says, I don't think I would necessarily be running again for a second term if Donald Trump weren't running. In other words, he's motivated by the desire to keep Trump out of the Oval Office. And he believes he's the one guy who can do it because he's the one guy who did it already. And so, yes, you're right. We've got these two, two presidents, one current, one former, who are heading for a major collision that the country would just as soon, not see. They just as soon see a new generation come along in both parties if they had that choice, but that's not the choice they have.
Michael, you were just talking about how high the stakes are. Politico lays it out, saying the next 50 days before the State of the Union will be one of the most perilous periods of Biden's presidency. Is that because he cannot afford to make a mistake, knowing that it could be him against Trump and what that means for the country?
Well, part of this, Steph, of course, I just was talking about the advantages of incumbency, being able to travel across the country on Air Force One, make policy announcement on your terms. There's also the real challenges of incumbency. And we see that in the meeting the president had today with members of Congress, especially with congressional Republicans. We know what a high priority it is for the president to get, for instance, funding for Ukraine, to continue the strong support we've shown for that country in its fight against Russia, and the ways in which Republicans and the Speaker of the House tonight once again saying that it appears that whatever border agreement might come out of the Senate might be dead on arrival in the House. And so the president, as he's trying to prepare for his State of the Union address, the largest audience he will likely speak to all year, short of the convention in August, he has to navigate a potential government shutdown, continued focus of Republicans on the border. And so this is a high stakes moment for the president, in addition to the challenges he continues to deal with overseas, factors beyond his control, and the support for Israel, which has been a real problem for his base as well, and the additional strikes we just saw again today as the U.S. navigates that situation in the Red Sea and continues to take on Houthi targets to make sure that the economy isn't disrupted as well.
Peter, this was the first formal meeting between President Biden and Speaker Johnson since the speaker was sworn in, what was it, almost 3 months ago? What is the dynamic between these two guys, right? Like when it was Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden, they had known one another for years. They worked with one another for years. But Mike Johnson and the president, that's a different situation.
Yeah, Mike Johnson's kind of an unknown, obviously, to the Biden White House. He's an unknown, frankly, to his own caucus. I think most House Republicans, don't know him that well. He hasn't been there that long and hadn't played a senior leadership role until these last few months. So he's a bit of an unknown all around. And we're seeing how he's going to navigate this. He comes, of course, to the office with great conservative credentials. They wouldn't have elected him speaker if he didn't. He, is one of the leaders of the Trump effort to overturn the 2020 election. He's no shrinking violet, no moderate. But on the other hand, now that he's in leadership, he clearly feels some pressure to find a way out of this at least the spending conundrum that they're in terms of keeping the government open. He does not want to have a shutdown. But on the other hand, he does feel like he needs a win on the border. He cannot let some sort of negotiated bipartisan deal from the Senate go through without feeling a lot of heat from his right wing. And right now, he can't afford to lose many votes. In fact, they're shrinking their majority one by one because of absences, resignations, and so forth. They barely have a functioning majority right now. So he is in a real hot spot. Biden understands that. He understands the Hill better than probably any president, in many years. But it doesn't mean he's going to make things easier for Mike Johnson. And I think that's where we're at right now.